Liam Kane rode through the gate of the Broken Spoke Ranch with the deed folded neatly in his saddlebag and a gnawing suspicion in his gut. The land, a sprawling 100 acres of dusty plains and sun-bleached rock under the vast Montana sky, had cost him pennies on the dollar. He'd bought it from a fast-talking agent in a town 3 days' ride away, a man whose eyes darted around as if expecting trouble to walk through the door at any moment. Liam knew that kind of man, and he knew a deal too good to be true was usually a trap. But for a man like Liam, running from the thunder of his own name, a trap in the middle of nowhere seemed preferable to the ghosts that haunted him in populated places. He was a man with a past etched in gunpowder and regret, a reputation he'd given everything to escape. This ranch was meant to be his hermitage, the final chapter in a book he wished he'd never written. He dismounted, the leather of his saddle creaking in the profound silence. The main house sagged slightly, a testament to time and neglect, its windows like vacant eyes. Yet, as he pushed open the groaning door, he noticed things that didn't fit. The thick layer of dust on the floor was disturbed by a single, narrow path leading from the main room to the kitchen. The hearth was swept clean, though no fire had burned in it for some time. It wasn't abandoned, it was dormant. A strange, unsettling feeling washed over him, the kind he used to get before a standoff. He wasn't alone here. The solitude he'd paid for felt like a lie before he'd even spent a single night. His hand rested instinctively on the worn handle of the Colt Peacemaker at his hip, a cold and heavy comfort he had hoped to leave behind forever. The instinct was old, forged in alleys and saloons where a moment's hesitation meant a shallow grave. He moved through the house with a quiet purpose, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden planks. In the small kitchen, a tin cup sat beside the water pump, a faint ring of moisture still at its base. It had been used recently. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't the work of a passing vagrant. This was habitation. He exited through the back door, the harsh afternoon sun making him squint. Behind the dilapidated barn, tucked away and sheltered from the wind, was a small but thriving vegetable patch. The soil was dark and turned, the plants green and healthy. It was a patch tended with care, a defiant splash of life in a sea of decay. Beyond it, inside the barn, he found the source of his deepest unease. In one of the stalls stood a single mare, her coat brushed to a fine sheen, her trough filled with fresh water. She watched him with intelligent, wary eyes. This was no squatter. This was someone who called this place home. A faint path, almost invisible in the tall grass, led away from the barn towards a small, stone spring house built into the side of a hill. With his heart pounding a slow, deliberate rhythm, Liam followed it. As he neared the cool shadows of the entrance, a figure emerged, blocking his path. It was a young woman, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes burning with a fierce, desperate light. She held a rusted pitchfork in her hands, its tines pointed directly at his chest, not with the tremor of fear, but with the steady resolve of someone with nothing left to lose. The woman's voice was low and rough, cracked with disuse but laced with steel. "You're one of his," she stated, not a question but an accusation. Did he finally get tired of sending his dogs and decide to come himself? Liam held up his hand slowly, a gesture of peace he'd rarely used in his former life. His mind raced. His? He had no idea who she meant, but he was standing on her land, or what she believed to be her land. He began, his voice calm and even, a tone he'd perfected to de-escalate volatile situations. "My name is Liam Kane. I'm no one's man." He carefully reached into his saddlebag, never breaking eye contact, and pulled out the folded deed. He held it out for her to see. "I bought this ranch." The deed was signed and filed in Helena. She glanced at the paper, her eyes flickering with a mixture of confusion and raw despair. The fight seemed to drain from her, and the pitchfork lowered an inch. "Bought it," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. He can't sell it." It's not his to sell. It was then that Liam saw past her defiance to the bone-deep weariness beneath. She was young, perhaps barely 20, but her eyes held the sorrow of someone much older. He learned her name was Ilara, and that she'd lived here her whole life. Her father had died last winter, leaving her to fend for herself against forces she didn't fully understand. His calculated purchase suddenly felt like a theft, and the quiet refuge he sought felt like an invasion. A war began inside him, the desire for solitude clashing with a conscience he thought long dead. "Look," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't know who this heat is. But I'm not here to throw you out. You can stay. Stay until you figure out where to go." The offer hung in the air between them, surprising her as much as it did himself. 2 days passed in a tense, unspoken truce. Liam worked on repairing a broken corral fence while Ilara tended to her garden, both of them moving in careful orbits around each other. Then, trouble arrived on horseback, just as Liam knew it would. 3 riders crested the hill, their silhouettes stark against the morning sky. The man in the lead was dressed in a fine city coat, his face clean-shaven and handsome, but his smile was a predatory slash that didn't touch his cold, calculating eyes. This was Silas. Liam had met 100 men like him, men who used politeness as a weapon before resorting to cruder ones. "Good morning," Silas called out, his voice smooth as polished stone. He swung down from his horse, his 2 brutish companions remaining mounted, their hands resting near their guns. "You must be the new squatter. I'm afraid there's been a mistake. This property belongs to my employer, Mr. Abernathy." Liam simply wiped his hands on his trousers and walked to meet him, positioning himself between the men and the house where Ilara was watching from a window. He produced the deed once more. "The law in Helena says it's mine," Liam stated flatly. Silas barely glanced at the paper before letting out a short, dismissive laugh. "Paperwork can be so misleading. Mr. Abernathy's claim to this entire valley is long established. That little document is a fraud, purchased from a desperate clerk we have since dealt with." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Leave. Take the girl with you if you like. Mr. Abernathy is a generous man. He'll even let you keep the pittance you paid. But if you're still here by the end of the week, his generosity will have run out." His gaze flickered towards the house, a clear and chilling threat aimed not just at Liam, but at Ilara. Silas mounted his horse, gave a mock salute, and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and palpable menace hanging in the air. That evening, the silence in the small ranch house was heavy with unspoken questions. The setting sun painted the room in strokes of orange and purple, but the beauty was lost on them. Liam finally broke the stillness. "Ilara," he said, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "What does a man like Abernathy want with this rundown piece of rock? It's not about the cattle grazing. There's something else. You have to tell me." Ilara stared into the cold hearth, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The fear she'd held at bay for so long was finally starting to crack her resilient facade. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Liam thought she would refuse. Then, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My father, he wasn't just a rancher. He was a land surveyor for the territories before he settled here." She took a shaky breath. "Years ago, he was hired to chart this entire region for the government. He discovered that the original charter Abernathy used to claim this valley, it was a fake. A clever forgery. Abernathy stole it all. Every last acre." Liam felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This was bigger than a simple land grab. "Where is the proof?" he asked. Ilara looked up, her eyes meeting his. "My father had the original, legitimate survey maps and the true government charter. Proof that Abernathy is nothing but a thief. He told me he hid them somewhere on this ranch, somewhere safe. A place no one would ever think to look. Silas doesn't just want the land, Liam. He wants to bury the truth. He wants those documents before they can ruin his master." Suddenly, everything made sense. The cheap price, the desperate clerk, Silas's venomous threats. They weren't standing on a simple ranch, they were standing on the one piece of ground that could bring an empire to its knees. The search consumed them. It began with a frantic energy, a race against the ticking clock of Silas's threat. They started in the house, prying at loose floorboards that revealed nothing but dirt and spiders. They tapped on walls, listening for the hollow sound of a hidden compartment, but found only solid wood. Liam's past had taught him how to search a room, how to think like a man with a secret, yet the house yielded nothing. They moved to the barn, the scent of hay and old leather filling the air. They sifted through dusty crates, checked for false bottoms in feed bins, and climbed into the loft, their lantern casting dancing shadows across the high beams. As they worked, a strange partnership formed. In the quiet moments between searching, they talked. Ilara spoke of her father, a quiet, principled man who had tried to fight Abernathy through legal channels, only to be ignored and threatened until he retreated into isolation. Liam, in turn, offered small, guarded pieces of his own story. He didn't mention the name he was known by in the wanted posters of his youth, but he spoke of the weight of a reputation of the moment he realized the gun on his hip had caused more sorrow than justice. He was seeking not just solitude, but atonement. Their shared vulnerability forged a bond stronger than the fear that surrounded them. They were two fugitives, one from a powerful land baron, the other from his own past, finding a strange and fragile hope in their shared search. But with every empty hiding spot, the knot of dread in Liam's stomach tightened. Silas would be back soon, and their time was running out. The thunder of hoofbeats announced his return. It was not the confident trot of his first visit, but a hard, punishing gallop. Silas and his 2 men reined in their horses, kicking up a storm of dust that choked the air. The pretense of civility was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw aggression beneath. Silas's face was a mask of cold fury. "Time's up, Kane," he snarled, dismounting with a predatory grace. "I gave you a chance to walk away. A chance you were too stupid to take." He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer being cocked echoing in the tense silence. "I know about the documents. Give them to me, and the girl. Do that, and I'll let you live to regret this day." Liam didn't flinch. He had already moved Ilara back towards the relative safety of the house, his own body creating a barrier between her and the men. He looked at Silas, at the hollow ambition in his eyes, and saw a reflection of a darkness he had fought to escape. He could run, perhaps. He could abandon this girl and this patch of dirt and disappear again. But running was what he had been doing for 10 years, and it had brought him nothing but loneliness. Here, standing in the dust, was a chance to finally stand for something. "Get inside," he said to Ilara in a low voice. She hesitated, her eyes wide with fear, but a shared look of understanding passed between them. She slipped back into the house. Liam turned his full attention to Silas. He slowly drew his Colt, the familiar way to grim, unwelcome friend. "The only thing you'll be taking from this ranch," Liam said, his voice low and deadly serious, "is lead." The world exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. Liam dove behind the heavy wooden water trough as a bullet splintered the spot where he'd been standing. He was outnumbered, but the ranch was his terrain now. He knew every angle, every piece of solid cover. He fired back, not aiming to kill but to disable, a discipline honed by a desire to be better than the man he was. His shot caught one of the henchmen in the shoulder, sending the man tumbling from his saddle with a cry of pain. The second henchman, a burly man with a thick beard, circled around the barn, trying to flank him. Liam was pinned down by Silas's suppressive fire. He could hear the man's heavy footsteps on the dry ground, getting closer. He was trapped. Just as the bearded thug raised his rifle, preparing to fire from the corner of the barn, a flicker of movement from the house caught his eye. The front window shattered outwards, and a lit lantern sailed through the air, trailing smoke. It smashed on the ground near the horses, erupting in a whoosh of flame. The animals screamed and reared in panic, their terror creating a momentary, chaotic diversion. It was the opening Liam needed. He swung around the edge of the trough and fired twice. His second shot struck the henchman's leg, and the man went down hard. Now it was just him and Silas. The fight was far from over, but in that moment, as he saw Ilara's determined face in the window, Liam knew he was no longer fighting alone. Enraged by the turn of events, Silas holstered his pistol and charged, deciding to end it with his bare hands. He crashed into Liam like a freight train, and the 2 men went down in the dust, a tangle of desperate limbs and grunted curses. It was a brutal, ugly struggle. Silas was strong, fueled by frustrated rage, but Liam was wiry and resilient, fighting with the grim determination of a man defending his last chance at redemption. He landed a punch to Silas's jaw, but the enforcer answered with a head-butt that sent stars exploding behind Liam's eyes. As they grappled on the ground, Silas's hand closed around a rock. He raised it high, ready to bring it down on Liam's head. At that exact moment, a new sound cut through the chaos, the thunder of a dozen horses, approaching at a full gallop. A voice boomed across the ranch yard. "Silas Abernathy! Drop it! You're under arrest!" Silas froze, the rock held aloft, his face a perfect picture of disbelief. A posse of lawmen surrounded them, their rifles leveled. At their head was a man with a silver star pinned to his vest and a familiar, weary face. Sheriff Brody. Liam had sent him a telegram from the last town, a single, cryptic line, "Abernathy." Broken spoke. Trouble, it was a contingency, a ghost from his past he had prayed he wouldn't need. As the deputies hauled a sputtering Silas to his feet, Ilara ran out of the house. "The well," she shouted, her eyes wide with sudden realization. "He said he'd put it where the water is coldest and the secret is deepest." Brody and Liam exchanged a look, and moments later, a deputy was pulling up a sealed oilskin tube from the depths of the stone well. Inside were the pristine, damning documents. Brody unrolled one of the maps, whistled low, and looked at Liam. "I knew you couldn't stay out of trouble, Kane. But I'm damn glad you haven't forgotten which side you're on." With Silas and his men in chains and the evidence secured, a profound peace settled over the Broken Spoke Ranch. Sheriff Brody clapped Liam on the shoulder before he mounted up to leave. "That charter will be in the hands of a federal judge by week's end," he said, his voice full of satisfaction. "Abernathy's empire is built on sand, and the tide is coming in. This ranch is yours, Ilara. Ironclad. And Liam," he added, a wry smile touching his lips, "try to stay retired this time." As the posse rode away, disappearing over the horizon, Liam and Ilara stood alone in the quiet aftermath. The sun was setting, casting long, gentle shadows that seemed to soothe the scarred earth. The smell of dust and gunpowder was already being replaced by the sweet scent of evening primrose. Liam looked at the sprawling land around him. It was no longer a hiding place, a desolate refuge from his past. It was a foundation. He looked at Ilara, who was watching him, her face free from the mask of fear she had worn for so long. In its place was a quiet strength, and the unmistakable glimmer of hope. He had come to this place seeking solitude, a silent penance for a life of violence. He had wanted to be alone. But as he stood there, with the promise of a shared future stretching out before him, he realized he hadn't found what he was looking for. He had found something infinitely better. He had found a home. We hope you were inspired by this story of courage and redemption. Sometimes, the greatest treasures aren't what we seek, but what we find when we stand up for what is right. If this story touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. Your feedback helps us create more content that you'll love. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational short films and dramatic tales. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update from Wild West Stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.